It was a beautiful day on March 26, 1986, when 12-year-old Michella Welch and her two younger sisters went on a bike ride to Puget Park in Tacoma, Washington. When they arrived, the girls realized they'd forgotten their picnic lunch, so Michella rode back home to get it. This would be the last time they ever saw their big sister alive. Once Michella was gone, the two sisters realized they had to use the restroom, so they briefly left the park to try and find a nearby bathroom. Once they returned, they found Michella's bike and their lunch, but no sign of Michella herself. They used a family signal call, which was a loud yelp that echoed throughout the park to try and locate her, but Michella never responded. Sadly, police later found her body near a makeshift fire pit hidden amongst the trees. She had been beaten, sexually assaulted, and her throat had been slit. Michella's murder shocked the entire Tacoma community, and kids no longer felt safe riding their bikes alone. Authorities recovered a DNA sample from Michella's body, but when it was eventually sent off for testing, it showed that it was not a match to anyone in the National CODIS database. During the investigation, though, a lot of tips came in, including one from Michella's classmate who reported seeing a man in the park staring at the girls the day of the murder. She gave enough details for authorities to create a composite sketch. Another tip came in from a man named Robert Washburn. Remember his name, this is important. Robert said he was jogging in the nearby Point Defiance Park and had seen a man who fit the description of Michella's killer. But this failed to provide any leads, and Michella's case went cold for 3 decades. In 2018, the Tacoma Police Department began working with a forensic genealogy expert who was able to use new DNA methods to narrow Michella's killer down to 2 brothers. One of those brothers was 66-year-old Gary Hartman, who was a nurse at a psychiatric facility. Authorities followed him closely and was able to get his DNA from a used napkin, where it was then sent to the lab for testing. The results came back with a match. Gary Hartman was responsible for the murder of Michella Welch. At the time of the murder, Gary was 30 years old, lived about a mile away from the park, and had no prior criminal history. In 2022, Gary was convicted of first-degree murder, and at 70 years old was sentenced to 26 years in prison. But in a twisted turn of events, just 5 months after Michella was murdered back in 1986, 13-year-old Jennifer Bastian was also sexually assaulted and murdered in the nearby Point Defiance Park. At the time, investigators believed the 2 girls were murdered by the same person, but they initially couldn't find any DNA evidence left behind in Jennifer's case. So her case also went cold for 3 decades. But, like Michella's case, in 2018, a cold case detective decided to test the clothing Jennifer was wearing at the time once again, and was actually able to pull some DNA from it. After also working with a forensic genealogy expert, this new DNA was sent in for testing, and it came back with a match. The now 70-year-old Robert Washburn. And if you remember, Robert was a jogger in Point Defiance Park who called in a tip on Michella's case just 5 months before he murdered Jennifer himself. Investigators still don't know why he inserted himself in that investigation. In 2020, Robert was found guilty and sentenced to 27 years in prison. Because of new DNA technology, after 30 years, both Michella and Jennifer now have justice.